Hello and welcome to episode 26 of series 4 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from The Big Picture People. Welcome to this penultimate episode of Series 4 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. Only this show and another one on the 19th of December to come out, and that is an interview with Helen Neal from HN Communications, who is going to be telling us all about sustainability and engagement in the workplace. And then we're into Series 5, beginning on the 2nd of January. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more what we've got coming up in our next series. In the next episode, on the final episode of the year, I'll give you some more insights into what we've got coming up in Series 5, but we've got some very, very diverse topics to cover with you. We have a retired spy who's going to be telling us all about communication lessons from working in espionage. We have someone who's going to be telling us all about workplace culture. We have a really interesting conversation with someone who is going to be telling us all about how you can lead an internal comms team when there is just one of you, or you have a relatively small team, which I think is something that many of you will find interesting. We have some ideas for you if you're the pay gap and dealing with pay disparity in your organization, how you communicate that. We're going to be covering that. And we're also going to be looking at retention and turnover within your organization, how communication feeds into the whole challenge of retaining a great talent within our organizations as well. So we've got some really, really diverse topics already lined up for you in Series 5 in 2024. If you're interested in being on the show, if you'd like to be an interviewee on the show, drop us a line at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Tell us a little bit about what you'd like to talk about. We do have a questionnaire that we send out to our prospective guests just to find out a little bit more about their motivations for being on the show and what they're going to be able to share with our audience as well. So if you're interested in being a guest, please drop us a line at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, and we're looking to book guests for from the spring onwards. So from end of March onwards, we already have many interviews already recorded, but if you're interested in being in the show and you're prepared to wait, then get in touch with us. So that's all I'm going to cover off. I'll let you get straight into this episode's interview. A key factor for employee engagers and internal communicators is understanding employee motivation and what actually motivates our employees. There's still a reliance on external motivation or extrinsic motivation in many organizations, with bonus and salary and promotions, things that we provide to our employees, but much less of a focus on intrinsic motivation. What is it that people actually want from their work? So that's what we're going to be exploring in this episode. What is intrinsic motivation, and is there a way that we can actually measure it so we can understand what we can do as individual managers or in our organizations to better motivate our employees intrinsically? And as we'll find out, that intrinsic motivation is far more powerful, particularly in our modern knowledge economy, than extrinsic motivation in terms of determining how people will behave and perform. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're looking at intrinsic motivation. We're also going to understand that once we have an understanding of intrinsic motivation, how can we use that to have more productive relationships with our employees? And that can then shape our internal communications or our engagement strategies as well. We're also going to take a little look at the world of AI and how artificial intelligence, AI, is affecting the way that we measure and influence our employees, and some of the potential within that, but also some of the watch outs that brings with it. So I hope you find this an interesting interview as we take a deeper dive into understanding employee motivation. My guest today is Casey Weil. Casey is Chief Executive Officer at Attuned. Attuned helps companies to build happier and more productive workplaces through science-backed data and AI, uncovering deep and actionable insights on what their employees need to be more engaged and fulfilled in their work. So, hello, Casey. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yes, good morning to me, good evening to you. Just for our listeners' benefit, whereabouts in the world are you?
You're finding me in Tokyo, and it's actually a nice blue sky day and not too warm. So we just had a typhoon kind of go through over the weekend. So it's clear skies. It's pretty nice right now.
Wow, excellent. And it's a first for me on the podcast. I think you're the first person. I've interviewed people from all over the world, but the first for Japan. So yeah, it's fantastic to finally get an interviewee in Japan. And you're
Fantastic.
clearly, well, you're not clearly. You aren't Japanese though. Tell us a little bit about how you found yourself in Tokyo, Casey, please, and where you originally hail from.
Yeah, we're reaching back a little bit. So I've been here over 23 years now, so quite a long time. So you can only hear the voice, but I'm a little bit Japanese on the inside. So I'm still American by passport and by nationality, originally from the US, upstate New York, but I grew up in Saudi Arabia for many years, high school, Boston College, Texas. And then pretty much after getting my degree, I came over to Japan for an adventure. I wanted to be a cool international businessman, and the image of Japan and kind of the mystique and the romance of it attracted me. And then I made it over that 2 year hump, and I've been here ever since.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. And so what are you doing? I gave a little bit of an insight there into Attune. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, but maybe what led you to what you're doing now? Tell us a little bit about your career background, please, Casey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with what we're doing with Attune. So it's intrinsic motivation software, so software as a service. So it's a SaaS business where we're doing a tech startup out of here in Japan. And we're just about to release our second product, which is psychological safety. So basically, what we're doing is taking deep psychology and we're making visible all of that psychological data that sits around us and between us that we can't see. And we're trying to make it visible, first of all, and measurable. And then so people can take an action. And there's not really that much intrinsic motivation software around. So we're trying to create a new category. We're doing pretty well here in Japan. We have customers all over the world, but yeah, with the time differences and everything else like that, it's here at Japan's our home base, but expanding steadily. And how I came to it, it was kind of a windy path, but originally I was in a recruitment agency and in recruitment for quite a long time, executive recruitment, and I absolutely loved it. But kind of connecting it to my intrinsic motivations, one of my deeper intrinsic motivations is rationality. So, kind of something I need to have at work. And for me, it manifests itself in a need to say, why? And working many years as a recruiter, the difference between somebody really kind of fitting and sticking and thriving at a job was that motivation component. And I've done thousands and thousands of interviews, and I could never understand anybody's really deep motivations for work. Doing interviews with them, maybe their self-awareness isn't that high, maybe they're gaming the interview, maybe they're using language that triggered me type of situation. But whether it was hiring for myself, lots of recruitment consultants over the years, or placing people into companies, it was that particularly that fit. Does the motivation fit with the manager and the manager of that new hiring company? Really understand the person coming in. And, personally, I had experienced it many times, like the pain of it, where I'd be doing one-on-ones with a new hire. And, the first month I'd be all energetic and excited to do the one-on-ones. And, he or she would be excited. But by the third month, we're kind of getting into this Groundhog Day where it's becoming a scripted dance where both of us know, like, we're going into this one-on-one. I'm going to do my best to motivate this person. This person's going to nod and smile and be polite, but their behavior is not going to change. Their KPIs aren't going to change. They're going to keep doing the same level of work. And it just got extremely frustrating. And all of this led to the desire to really measure intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation is not connected to personality. So personality tests don't show this. So, off-the-shelf solutions that existed. So I had to kind of create it. And then it was 3 years of research and a lot of statistical analysis. And finally, we did it.
Fantastic. So I thought that's great. Thank you, Case. That's a really good summary. And I guess you've already started to use the term intrinsic motivation, and I think it's really important to maybe just before we go into any more detail, just to define the difference between, and I remember this back from my MBA days. I remember we did some stuff around this. So I remember, and it'd be useful for me to probably you to kind of recap for my benefit the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and how organizations typically, kind of treat the two or don't treat the two. They, like you say, I think you've implied there that the extrinsic motivation tends to be the primary tool or the primary vehicle that many organizations use. So maybe you can just put a few definitions around that, Casey, just before we get into the detail.
Yeah, for sure. So extrinsic is basically from the outside, and intrinsic is from the inside. Um, the depth of difference is extrinsic motivation really only lasts for a short period of time. This is typically like incentives or bonuses or kind of some goals or something. We can have like a team party if we do really great on our deliverables this week or we deliver this project. And a lot of extensive research. There's hundreds of papers is extrinsic motivation is good for repeatable simple tasks. So let's say you're, I don't know, doing something ridiculously mind-numbing like lining up pens to make pens are very straight, and how many can you do in an hour? And the more pens you can line up perfectly straight in an hour, you're going to get a little bit more money as an incentive. In that type of situation, having extrinsic motivation where you get paid more for doing a repeatable task that's simplistic works.
Mm,
But if you try to do something like what our normal work life is okay, you have to work with a lot of different people. You have to communicate. There's many different stakeholders. You have to be creative. All kinds of challenges come. Extrinsic motivation doesn't work. So that's where intrinsic motivation is very important. This goes from the inside, and everybody has intrinsic motivation. It sits there inside of them. And many people that probably listen to this podcast or, many people out there think, oh, I not that intrinsically motivated, but everybody is. It's just not being released.
mm,
So if you have a manager who can understand your intrinsic motivation or an environment that allows that intrinsic motivation to come out, then you're going to have more energy. You're going to be able to overcome more difficult problems. In many ways, you can be more creative. You can kind of be psychologically safe, and you're just going to have more energy and less burnout from that side. So,
mm,
unfortunately, I think most managers still today, or at least in my generation, manage from extrinsic motivation. That's what we're taught, carrot and the stick. Okay. If somebody's out of line, give them a little bit of a stick. Here's a carrot to try to get that there. And it just doesn't work. And I know as like a sales leader for a decade or so, I'd always try to craft the most perfect, incentive for the team to hit the goal. And I'd think about it and think about it. And okay, what does this individual get excited about? And it never worked. It
mm,
never really got that much more performance. So as soon as I could kind of shift my mind to like, okay, let me understand what this person individually needs. And really the key is everybody's unique because intrinsic motivation is really our lived experiences up until that moment in time. And then what we're really kind of measuring with a tune is somebody's value hierarchy, which connects to their intrinsic motivation. And the hard part is understanding somebody not like yourself.
mm,
And that's the really hard part.
mm,
But that's what we
mm.
do.
Yeah, no, that again, that's great, and and I guess in a nutshell, then, so extrinsic motivation is what you're given externally. It's all like you said about bonuses, rewards, that sort of thing, and then the intrinsic is what drives us from within. And I guess I mean, again, without turning this into an MBA class, I mean, a lot of what I see in organizations, and I'd be interested to know if you see the same, is a lot of that kind of misdirected focus, like kind of overly emphasizing extrinsic motivation, comes from the kind of production line mentality or the production line kind of way of managing people, which again links to what you were saying around extrinsic works very well in a kind of highly regulated, very standardized, very routine type of environment. But now we're working in a knowledge economy that is not a kind of an appropriate way, and that's why we really need to focus on intrinsic motivation. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So unfortunately, like so many organizations still manage out of like a Tayloristic system.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
Tayloristic management where, okay, how can we get more widgets out in an hour? How can we get more cars done? And this goes back to like the 1920s and 10s and that
Yeah.
factory type of mile. But what you're talking about right now is organizations, what they face is how can we be resilient? How can we be agile? How can we shift to digital? And it's really kind of big cultural shifts and living in this VUCA world where things are uncertain and you have to change pretty quickly. And
Yeah.
it doesn't work if you're managing like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so that takes us on to the next challenge then, and Casey, which you're obviously well qualified to answer, which is how do you measure it? Because that is something quite, quite visceral and to a large extent, or it would appear to me. When I think about what my intrinsic motivations are, it's quite, kind of it's emotional. It's a lot of things wrapped up in that, and trying to rationalize that can sometimes be quite tricky. So where do we start with that? How do we measure intrinsic motivation?
It's hard to measure by yourself. So it took us a long time to create this. So it took like 3 years and a lot of research, initial kind of assessments that were very long. Where we're at right now, it only takes 10 to 15 minutes. We have it in multiple languages. So 10 to 15 minutes, you get your own intrinsic motivator report. Our team of psychologists identified 11 different intrinsic motivations. And it's kind of categorized, by a percentage about how much you need this. And also, is it need to have for you? Does you have to have that from your environment, like your manager or your workspace, to be motivated? Or if it's like neutral, which also might be kind of a little bit demotivating to do that. But what we're really measuring is that value hierarchy. So the link is, okay, what you value most. If you're forced to really choose something, what would you choose? And that's kind of the basic algorithm. So there's thousands and thousands of data points behind the construction of this to get that. And basically, it's a 1 in a million chance that people have a similar motivator profile to do this. And this is why it's really hard for kind of our evolutionary psychology to keep up with it and shift to understand somebody not like ourselves. But right now, 10 to 15 minutes. It used to take like 3.5 to 4 hours in the initial version. So we could get enough questions. Had to have 1,000 people take it initially. So we could get that down to 2 hours. And then we got it down to this. So it was a total pain in the ass to create, like really, really painful to do it. So, yeah.
So I know you said there were 11 different criteria there, and I mean, 11 is a long list to go through on a podcast. But could you? Are you happy to share what some of those are, and maybe just give us a flavour for maybe one or two, just to sort of, get a sense of, so people can relate to what those things in that hierarchy might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can maybe speak towards my own intrinsic motivation. So my top intrinsic motivation is autonomy. Basically the need to decide for myself. I don't like being told twice. And this is probably part of the reason I became an entrepreneur. On the opposite side, at the very bottom, is feedback. And this is kind of the tricky part, like when interacting with intrinsic motivation. So it's not a behavior. It's not like a personality. So for me, feedback doesn't link to my motivation. But it doesn't mean I don't accept feedback or, I push against it to a certain degree. Security is also very low for me. So the need to understand boundaries or rules or very defined processes. Some people really want clarity about, okay, what is my responsibility? For me, I'm totally fine with, things being quite vague. My second top one, so to go back up to the top of what's most important for me, is altruism. So this one's kind of interesting, is your intrinsic motivations basically shift very quietly on a yearly basis. So if we look back 4 years ago when we were just starting to launch a tune, altruism was kind of low for me. But over the years, it kind of went up a little bit, and we're learning the intrinsic motivations from our environment. And it's also kind of big emotional life events that sets what is important for me. So a year and a half ago, we had like a special needs baby that was born, and wasn't sure that the baby was going to survive, type of thing like that, but got lots of support from many, many people. And that really shifted altruism higher for me. So it's kind of a real like milestone where you can see what became most important for me shifted by my own life experiences. And, that's why it's kind of important to stay in touch with these and take a look every year just to see, okay, where am I at for your own self-awareness, or if you're looking at it with a team, to really have the updated GPS about, okay, what is most important for this person? So, if you're still managing the Casey's motivation you saw 3 years ago, it's going to be a bit out of date.
Okay. So it's contextual. It does change, and a lot of it will be based on maybe immediate situation and circumstances and events, or or recent events anyway. So okay, that's
the big events. So it's slowly. So like if you had a bad day and somebody yelled at you on the train or something like that, that's not really.
It's not going to show up. Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of a glacial, but it's still moving sort of thing.
Exactly, yeah. And that's the hardest thing for us humans to understand, is slow moving changes, right? Fast changes we can see.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're definitely right there. So, yeah, and so I mean, I'm again, 11 is a long list to go through. I don't want to go through the full list. If people listening want to have a look at, I know we're going to put it. I'll talk about it later on. We're going to put a link into to Attuned on the show notes. That is there a list of those different motivators errors, or is there a white paper that you've got on that, just in case people want to kind of just do a little bit more deeper diving into that.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of white papers. So we have intrinsic motivation white paper, we have psychological safety white paper.
Hmm.
All the motivations are listed just at the top of our website at attune.ai. And if
Okay.
anybody listening, if they want to get in touch with me at kc.wall@attune.ai, I'm happy to give kind of a free report if they reference your podcast.
Okay, great. Oh, no, that's fantastic. Thank you. That's a great offer, Casey. And I'll get those links off you after we finish recording, and I'll pop them into the show notes. I've got your LinkedIn profile and your website, which I was going to put on there, but any extra links, I'll pop those on as well. So that's fantastic. So just going back to our measurement of intrinsic motivation, then, and you've given us a good flavour for that. What next? Though, so how if I'm working in an organisation and we've kind of got that grip on intrinsic motivation, and if I understand correctly, then so that would be on an individual by individual basis. Would you get like a profile for your team, or is that too simplistic and too reductionist to do that, or would you recommend that?
Yeah, all fantastic questions. So, like intrinsic motivation. So, what we can do is we can do it at scale. So, every individual has their own unique intrinsic motivations. Even if you're working on a team, like with similar job, like the culture is there, like it
Mm,
might feel like a similar culture or people have similar personalities. Actually, what motivates them tends to be quite different. It
mm,
wasn't in the question, but I find this fascinating. Is this isn't totally scientifically correct, but this is what we've seen in qualitative data working with our customers. Is teams that have relatively similar intrinsic motivations, meaning there's not a huge variation with people on opposite ends of the spectrum of one particular motivator. If it's relatively similar, those teams seem to perform better. And I guess it would be is because there's less conflict, there's deeper understanding, they make
mm,
decisions in kind of the same way. So going
mm,
to how do you use this? It's really kind of what you're trying to change within your organization. What are you trying to fix? So the outcome for us is if you can understand and communicate a little bit better about somebody that is different than you. It tends to work quite well with somebody that, okay, you have meetings with or catch ups with, or that it doesn't feel like you're always getting through. Sometimes
mm,
it feels like it, but sometimes it, like, why didn't that go well? I tried my best. I was really kind. I thought I explained perfectly, but for whatever reason, you don't get kind of that recognition or understanding outcome. And that's where it tends to work very well. So within one-on-one type of situations, but the outcomes will be higher trust. And then ultimately psychological safety, and then the business outcomes later can be higher performance, better in innovation, more agility if you have higher psychological safety. So intrinsic motivation to start. So you get more inclusion because you're understanding somebody not like yourself, where as before you might react kind of emotionally or get frustrated with the way people are looking at the world very different than yourself. But with this, then you can understand, build that trust, get the psychological safety to the business outcome. So usually people are trying to change something about their culture is what it is. Either there's a
yeah,
lot of people
yeah.
leaving, they're hiring pretty badly. It can be used at different points in the employee life cycle.
Yeah. Oh no, it's good. And it's interesting what you were saying there about the fact that teams that are more homogeneous in terms of their intrinsic motivations tend to be, the more successful. And obviously, kind of organizations quite rightly have a very big focus on diversity and inclusion and neurodiversity. So it's interesting because often, we're I guess the way we tend to think about this now is that if we're all kind of see the world in the same way and we've all got the same kind of lens, as it were, we were in risk of kind of groupthink and kind of missing out on those opportunities. But what your research there is saying, and I know it's not anti-diverse, but what you're saying is that actually in this case there's a benefit if we do share those intrinsic motivators. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. I think we're just like our data is a lens in a deeper layer of psychology. So if we're looking at
Mm,
your values, your intrinsic motivation, which sits below your personality, which sits below your behavior. So, if you want diversity in experience or diversity in thought process or any of those kind of externally visible types of diversity, then that's great, right? But
mm,
you can still have, and like we have even here on some of our high performing teams, very different backgrounds, like extremely different backgrounds, probably different neurodiversity. It might always be tested, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But intrinsic motivations are relatively aligned, and the team just goes smooth. It can kind of go quickly.
Mm.
So, for example, a lot of the friction comes as I said before when we were talking about my intrinsic motivations, that security needs are quite low for me. And we haven't taken your intrinsic motivations, but let's say yours were security needs were really high. And if you're managing me and you're being very kind of detailed about the process, or you're getting frustrated because I'm skipping steps type of thing like that, and you're really defining the boundaries of what I can do and what I can't do, I'd probably kind of get frustrated. And then you might see my frustrated and you're probably thinking, I'm just doing my best for Casey, trying to help make things clear for him.
Yeah.
And that's where it comes up, right? And we would probably have some friction in understanding. But if we were more closely aligned with our security needs, whether low, whether high, whether somewhere in the middle, then no friction would come there.
Yeah. 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 No, I know. Yeah, that makes sense. So in terms of the toolkit, you've talked a little bit about Attuned, and again, just be interested. Just I think listeners will be interested in how does it work? Is it like, so is it a survey that you fill in? You said it takes about 10-15 minutes, and then you get a report. Is that how does it work in the sort of mechanic? What's the mechanic behind it, Casey?
Exactly. So it's a survey assessment that's delivered to every individual. So you just put in the individuals. You can create the teams, like however you want the team hierarchies to be. So whether it's by job or cohorts of when people joined, type of situation. Then you get the individual. Every individual will get the report. Every individual also gets a dashboard. The tool is primarily made for managers. So the managers would get a dashboard. They get, okay, here are the motivations for a team. It's visualized. You can see everybody's individual. Kind of the real key feature that our customers tend to use and find the most value at is a motivator gap feature. So this is where you have those opposite motivations, and that's all quickly visualized. Then the next step of Attune is we have the communication tips, or like the mindfulness tips, to change the way you're framing an interaction with somebody with an opposite motivator for you. So those sit within Attuned. And kind of what we'll be releasing very soon is nudges. So we know the differences between people. So we're going to have connections between calendars and Slack to begin with. And let's say 5 minutes before a one-on-one or a catch-up, I can get a notification say, hey, Casey, this is how Craig's motivated. Why don't you ask him this question? And the system and the algorithm will pick up those differences, and probably where I have blind spots is what it will do with those nudges from there. And then the next part of the system is for the customers that want to pay attention to if motivation is being satisfied. We have a very personalized engagement kind of survey that can go out as a pulse, whether it's every 2 weeks or a month or a quarter, as you like. But what it's doing is only checking the motivations that's most important to every individual. So most engagement pulse surveys ask the same question to everybody, which means the data is great at an organizational level, but at an individual level, there's gaps in it. So if you're asking me, again, I have low feedback needs, intrinsic motivation. Hey, Casey, are you getting feedback from your manager this week? And I say, yeah. And they're like, are you satisfied that? And I say, yeah, that's actually bad data because it doesn't have any connection for my own motivation.
Yeah.
So we're only asking what's most important to every individual. So it gets a little bit more kind of pinpoint with how people are doing. And that way you can kind of keep an eye on, is anybody, getting demotivated? And if they are, what it is, and you can make that intervention before. And there's some algorithms in there about predicting turnover as well.
Excellent. That sounds really, really sophisticated. Really, really good. So as I said, we'll put some links into the show notes if people want to have a little bit more of a dig around in that. Just before we close off, Casey, just a final one. Just in terms of anyone who's listening into this, one of our guests around, I think he works in employee engagement, also in internal communications, that sort of thing. Any final tips from you in terms of employee motivation and understanding employee motivation and really getting their head around this, the concept that we've talked about today, in particular intrinsic motivation? Any kind of final sort of quick wins, tips, ideas, that sort of thing?
Oh, that's a tough question. It's like, just do it and understand that it's there. It's like, I think if probably people that are listening to your podcast, probably are already there, but throw away your extrinsic motivation toolkit. Just throw that in the trash,
Yeah.
And just try. You let's say you don't want to use a software or you don't want to start doing this. It's like, okay, have the conversation. What do you think intrinsically motivates you? Your team member. do that self-awareness exercise with yourself, give a little bit of time for reflection and have those conversations. So it's really about asking the questions and having the conversation. And that's ultimately the use of our tool as well. Like, you get all the insights, but the conversation still has to be had.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Actually, I said that was the last question. I've got one other question for you. Sorry, Casey.
Yeah, no problem.
You're obviously you're massively, your tool uses AI, I believe, and I know you've been involved with it's kind of a pioneer in AI, and I've been using it in your work. I'm just interested. We've had this conversation on a few of the episodes recently because it seems to be very contemporary at the moment. And at the moment, a lot of people are talking about AI and its opportunities, but also there's a bit of fear. Again, it's a very general question, but I just be interested to know, particularly in this space, where you see AI really adding value, but also maybe some of the watch outs of AI and some of the limitations that people may not be aware of.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, AI is scary, at least at this point in time. I don't think it needs to be. The way
Mm,
we're looking at it, like generative AI has been massive this year, kind of revolutionary. And, a lot of tech companies are like, okay, what is our AI strategy or what we're going to do with it? And it took me a long time to get my head around, like, okay, what is really the value for the customer? What is really the value for the user? If you put in a chat box. And some things that we'll actually be coming out with pretty soon is, you'll be able to assign tasks to your team in a very specific way, and like the LLM, the AI, will
mm,
generate that for you. So
mm,
let's say, you have to assign me a new task. Maybe it's not a great task, or, you don't enjoy speaking to me about giving me different jobs and you think I won't like it. If you just write the task into the chat box, it'll write the mail for you. It'll write a little speech for you, say, okay, frame the task like this. Here's the task.
mm,
And say this to Casey, and you can copy and paste and put that in. So,
mm,
some of those difficulties in communication with somebody not like ourselves, like, it can help with that generation of it.
mm,
And, like, another thought that we're thinking of is, okay, after meetings, if somebody wants to, like, look at a one-on-one and have those recorded, the AI can break down how the meeting went in terms of send a quick report to the manager and say, hey, when you were speaking to Casey, you missed his altruism motivator. You were speaking a lot about, feedback, which doesn't work so much on him. So next time, why don't you ask these 3 questions? And you get
mm,
that feedback loop really quickly after your behavior, like on a one-on-one. So that can be kind of a good use for it
mm,
as well. But I think what we can look at is, it's used in the best way. It could be an extension of our human brain and kind of the capabilities that we have right now. So if we look at evolutionary psychology, like Dunbar's numbers, so there's that 150 number about how many people's names and faces we remember. But there's a smaller one of 15, and these are the 15 people of who we can generally, 15 people on average, understand what makes them tick, how they're going to react, how are they going to work emotionally. And as we're leading and managing our people, we've only got the capacity for 15, and this includes our personal lives as well. So if we can use AI to have it deliver the right type of communication or the right type of mindset or framing of how we should approach somebody else, and get that timing right and hand us the way to interact with somebody, I think we can take that Dunbar number of 15 on average and extend it to 40 or extend it to 50. So that means a
mm,
lot more people are going to have better experiences with their managers. And as you know, that's why most people quit. So I'm
mm.
quite hopeful. We're quite bullish. It's just exactly finding out what is useful and not just making it a gimmick at this point in time.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting, how you talk there, and often I think people see AI, but going back to what we were saying earlier, is kind of like doing all the grunt work around, kind of breaking down a relatively repetitive task. But I think interesting what you're talking about there is actually using it for quite high emotional intelligence. You're using it, obviously in conjunction with your tool, but to kind of really help someone who maybe hasn't got that kind of self-awareness about what they're saying and how they've said it, to kind of really have some insights into that. So it's, in that respect, I find that fascinating. It's a really revolutionary way of using it, I guess. So yeah,
Exactly. Like,
fantastic.
AI is just as good as the data that it's trained on, right? So we've
Yeah.
got some very unique intrinsic motivation data. Very soon we'll have very unique and insightful psychological safety data and outcomes for teams. And if you train the model on that, and okay, we want to create more psychologically safe teams, and we put a whole lot of data in there, and we kind of know the sub elements that lead up to psychological safety, then you can use AI to kind of deliver it and craft it to at scale. And that's the beauty of it, to help us in those emotionally intelligent ways, which we all struggle with, right? So
yeah. No, fantastic. Well, no, that's a really great insight there into, how you're using AI. And as I say, it's something that I know I've talked about on other episodes, and I think it's very contemporary at the minute, that people were really genuinely interested, and also, partly, like you say, a little bit frightened by it as well, because like anything new and revolutionary like this. So yeah. Well, look, Casey, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much. We've already mentioned that we're going to put some links into the show notes, and I'm going to put your LinkedIn profile. I'm going to put the link to your website, but also after we've hung up, I'll get your if you're as long as you're okay with it, I'll put your email address in there as well, and any other way that people can reach out to you, but also any other resources that you've got that people can access and find out more about what you do and more about your ideas.
Awesome. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed the chat, so thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and appreciate, as I say, I know it's back end of your day, and I'm just starting out here, but glad we found a time that would work for both of us, where not too antisocial or unsociable hours. So thank you very much.
ありがとうございました。またよろしくお願いします。
Thank you, arigato.
Exactly.
Thanks, Casey. Take care.
Thank you. See ya.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. If you've got any ideas for episodes you'd like us to cover in future, you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can use the feedback form at engagingic.com. If you're not already subscribed to the show via your podcast platform, please do so. And if you could leave a review for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have links to other episodes at engagingic.com. All of our previous episodes are available there. And if you're interested in our visual communication services, our big pictures, our learning maps, our explainer videos, and also our live graphic recording, please get in touch with us again at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Thank you.